Once again, good morning. When Nariman asked me to talk about quality in housing, I was a little upset because it's a very strange and difficult subject to be investigated. So I thought that some way there could have been a kind of phenotype, a set of observable characteristics of trait of an organism that deals with the organism morphology, with its development, with its behavior, and which is strictly related to the genotype. So to all of the characteristics that are within the DNA of the organism itself. This confrontation was useful for me to trying to understand if there was something that could be visible to understand what's quality. The question of the quality obliged me to accept the challenge of this investigation in terms of finding the elements, those phenotypes elements that were easily visible and clearly describable as something that deals with the way we use houses and we leave spaces. And it was immediately clear to me that there were so many elements, so many components that can influence some way this description, that I couldn't find a single way to say this is how we can really evaluate quality in housing or in architecture. That's why I tried to have a kind of it's a joke that was pretty useful for me to understand a possible way for defining the quality in housing. So I tried to think to a formula that could contain all of the elements that could be useful. And this formula was written in terms of a summation of a function of k from n to m, where n and m are elements that we can gather to describe the quality itself. So I thought that by asking people what could be the elements that I could put into that summation, they could be resumed, take it as an experimentation, okay? It's a test, like in a lab, right? Those characteristics could be resumed into three main categories: materials, furniture, and size. When you ask people to describe the house, the place where they would like to live, you could make those three groups, where for materials, I intend all of the materials we use in architecture, from light to the building materials. So let's say wood, concrete, quality in terms of good materials. Quality in terms of furniture, because everyone wants some good furniture to dress the house in the best way as possible. And size, because it's true that someone prefers a small house where it's easy to clean and to take care of things in the house, but generally everyone will say a big house with a lot of space, light, and so on. So I thought that those three elements that are generally considered as the main elements to define the quality had something that was strange to my ears. I saw that if we consider the quality of materials, that's not enough to describe the quality of the housing and of the living in that space. I've got this example from well, it's a famous producer of taps, and you see this swan, which is also the name of the tap, where the commercial reports the quintessence of exclusiveness, which sounds very impressive. And it's even more impressive if you think that this could be made in different materials, but also in gold 24 carats. So that it was nice to see that even the most precious, the most exclusive material can't define the quality. It's very clear. We have no doubt. As an architect, I have no doubt this is not a question of quality. As well as furniture, because many of the places that can be houses, villas, palaces, or boats, or things like that are considered quality luxuries. Those are made with this kitsch sense of the space and of the furniture itself. But this is considered a high level and one of the top level boats all over the world. So I thought that formula would have been more precise if all of the functions, so materials, furniture, and size, would have put into brackets and raise it to C, where C is culture, is knowledge. That's the way we can manage, and we manage as professional those three main tools that are very useful for our for the definition of our space. That's why when we see a picture like this, we immediately understand about the quality of this space, and even if materials are sometimes very good or sometimes are, let's say, usual, right? Steel, marble, different kind of woods, leather for furnitures, good furnitures, and so on. And we understand that this is a special place. But by looking at this image, we understand also there is something more, right? There's another element that we can put into our formula, which is the environment. Right? We cannot say that a building is enough to define the quality of living in itself if we do not consider the environment. But once again, I would try to, I asked myself if the addition of the letter E, so the element, the environment, was enough to define this quality. So I try to understand this through some very interesting examples that I remembered when I was a student. That was this beautiful movie that was filmed by the Eames, Charles and Ray Eames, which is powers of 10, where by zooming in and out, a couple is having a picnic in a park, we can see things, the same thing, but from different perspective, very far, very in the body of the two guys. So by getting distance, by putting some distance between us and the subject we are observing, we can see things with a different lens. That's why I thought that the house we have seen before by Mies van der Rohe, the Farnsworth house, which is considered one of the ideal dream of everyone, is perfectly replies to what is generally considered the good house. Generally, I mean, if you ask to common people, they will think to a detached house with a garden, with a lot of space, with good furniture, light inside, and so on. So that could be, in a different environment, the same expression. So let's say from a very simple typological perspective, it's just a detached house. But when we look at the detached house and we think, well, this is one, but what if we double the same? What if we consider that in the same environment, which could be even that beautiful place used by Mies van der Rohe, we double the same building? Here they have the same spaces they were generally asked. People have a car parking, a backyard garden. They have some green grass in front of the house. They have big houses and so on. But the fact that there are two immediately changes the perception of the space. What if we multiply? Instead of 2, we take 10 or 12 or even more of this. And what if we multiply again and again and again this situation? What is the detached house, which is the common dream of the normal people, becomes something that has nothing to do with the quality of life? So I thought, well, this could demonstrate that we did something more. The environment has to be a special environment. That's why I thought to the common dream once again, the beautiful sea in Dubai, which is the target of so many people every year that goes there to have a nice weekend or a long vacation, swimming in a beautiful sea. And I was taken to this Palm Island that was so famous some year ago, where an exclusive set of houses are facing the sea of Dubai. Then I thought, well, let's see what this is made by. And I zoomed in, like in power of tens, and I saw that. And that was really amazing. I mean, it was ugly. It's a street where two lines of houses, detached houses, once again, the normal common dream, are facing each other, and they are facing the sea. What? Not really the sea, but just a little portion of it, right? And when I zoomed more in that space, I saw that this is the backbone that brings people from the earth to this island. And so you see in the background those kind of houses, very exclusive houses, and this kind of highway that is joining the spaces. And I thought, well, maybe the environment has not to be considered as itself, but even the letter E, the environment, has to put into the brackets raised at C. Maybe we have to see once again through the lens of the culture, meaning culture in the most extended way as possible, the possibility to filter, to see things with knowledge. So the function of all of the structure of the elements that I described before, plus the environment raised to C, seemed to be enough at that moment. But then I thought, what if, and this is the lecture of what if, what if we put the same beautiful house in a place which could be considered beautiful, right? No highway, no ugly building, just beautiful, incredible, amazing, astonishing landscape, like Alps. Wonderful. What if we take a beautiful house which is made by great architect Carlo Molino or whatever else, in a beautiful landscape, in a beautiful environment? Is this enough to define the quality of living? What if this building, even modern, is totally isolated, detached by the, let's say, civilization, by the world? This could be a beautiful place where to stay. It's a shelter, but it's alone. I mean, this defines describes a kind of life which implies no relationships with anyone. It means we are alone. We live isolated by the world. We live with no one around us. That for someone is a good thing, but not for everyone. So I understood that there was something was missing. And I thought that within those brackets, we have to put also something more, which is indicated with F, facilities. Facilities into or related with that environment. That's the meaning of FE. And we have already understood that we have to see these facilities through the lens of culture, where the, let's say, the general meaning of culture. So facilities. Let's remember me very clearly this image that was, well, I often use this image in my lectures because I see that this resume a lot of characteristics which are very impressive and very important to discuss about housing, about relationship, about life, about city, which is intended not only as a group of houses, but as all of the things we can do within that space. If we look carefully at this portion of this fresco, at this detail, which is called the Allegoria of the and effects of the good and bad governmental into a city, we see that this good effects, this good elements which are expressed by Ambrogio Lorenzetti are not only the house, are not only the architectural space, are not only the good buildings or towers or bell towers, churches, domes, etc. But it's all of those little elements that are part of our daily life. It's relationship. it's the way we use the city. It's the way we are in contact with other people who are living the same space we are living. It's trade, it's work, it's selling, moving, hosting, etc., etc. So if I consider that, I remember that since the very beginning of in the history of the humanity, people always try to stay together. They started living alone, like eremites, but at the end, the humanity was born around the junction, the gather of many people who were sharing something, sharing space, sharing relationships, sharing time. Cataloguk, which is considered the first urban form all over the world, is made of a group of houses that were joined each other without any street, and they got into the house from the roof with a stair. And this solid, very dense, extremely dense configuration is exactly like the portion of an organism made by different cells. It's once again, if we consider the power of tens, is something that we can see in detail within the body. So it's part of our DNA, staying with other guys, staying with people, creating relationships within a built space, a built environment. But this way to consider the common space and to consider how we could live together deals also with the movement of people that were leaving countryside towards the city to find a better place where to stay during the centuries, to find a place where to work, to gain money, to buy food, not to be so strictly related with nature in terms of what happens, but in terms of a good space where to live together. The densification of the city made by houses that were growing, hosting different level of kind of people from different level of the society, were producing this strange boxes that we call houses, where people stay together. And even if they are from different cultures, different countries, different social levels, they share something by meeting, by talking on the staircase, by meeting each other on the entrance of those houses. It's an engine. It's like we could say something that really produces the opportunities to share, to live together, to share thoughts, to share time, to share space. But at the same time, by growing, those cities became the opposite. Instead of allowing us to meet each other, they are just a place where to stay, where to work, where to eat, where to sleep. And the three elements reminds some way the rational division of the daily life for people. It's a schematic, it's a very framed, structure of life. We live in huge numbers of people that never meet each other, even if they walk or they cross the same street as they are doing in this picture. So there's a point of break, right? That something happens when the number of the people who are living in the same space grows so much and makes it impossible to stay together. But we have seen during the pandemic, especially during the lockdown period 1 year ago, 2 years ago, that people really need to stay together. We cannot live totally isolated each other, as we have seen in those marvelous places on the Alps. We need this relation. We know that when we are too many, there are too many people in the same space, there's no relation at all, like crossing street we saw before. But we also know we need some place where to share our life with someone else. And this image is struggling because it shows you that within that small circle, everyone is trying to find their own world, the private bubble where they can share with people they can trust because they are part of the members of the same family. So they are safe people in terms of pandemic, but they are still trying. And it's nice. You see someone strictly respect their boundaries. Someone is trying to expand, to go beyond the limit. It's a natural temptation to stay together, maintaining distances, staying with, but having your private space. It's a balance. We are daily looking for a balance between private and public space. Once again, this reminded me that space, that public space that we usually share with others, is so important that we cannot do without it, right? After the Second World War, one of the very first things that the Dutch government decided to rebuild were not only, there were houses, of course, but it was not only a house. It was the public space that was produced by very small intervention, reusing places that were destroyed by bombing, during the war. And it's very famous, the contribute by Aldo van Eyck, who produced many of those places all over Amsterdam. And those places are made of almost nothing, very few elements that, as Hetzberger reminds us, are not just one single use intended. They are something that could be adopted and used by children in this situation, in this case, in many different ways, because children are so full of fantasy that they can use a wall to do something or the opposite, right? So I thought, well, we had a lot of examples in our life, we saw as scholars, as students before and scholars after, that we need this space, and we need to share these facilities, not to live with these facilities privately, not only for us. You cannot have beautiful building in beautiful spaces with facilities that are for you only, because you cannot live without people. That's the truth. Maybe you can stay alone for a while, but sooner or later you need a relationship. It's food for your mind, but it's food for your soul. Right? So I thought that in the formula, the facilities had to be multiplied by sharing. So it's shared facilities within that environment through the lens of culture. Now it works. Now it seems it works. So I thought, where I can find this situation, where I can find good materials, quality materials, a good environment, the quality of the realization of the building through the lens of the culture, the knowledge. Where can I find facilities which are shared by many people who stay together, but they maintain their private space within a collective one? The co-housing. That seemed very easy to me, right? I thought that could be a possible solution, because co-housing it's exactly that. It is a house where people share spaces and facilities, and they gave each other the availability to do things for the members of the co-housing. They keep their private spaces, their private dwelling, but they share a lot of other things and time and ideas and energies day by day. So I thought, well, once again, we are here next to co-housing. But I also know that all of co-housing have a big problem. There's an issue to be analyzed in co-housing. Right? Even if we think about different kind of co-housing in different environment, different type of co-housing, we could spend a lot of words about the description of a co-housing and how they are made. But I think that once again, the co-housing, if we consider the co-housing has the solution to all of our problems, to define the quality of housing, well, that could be a problem. Because in a certain way, the co-housing works as like in a desert, right? It's like an oasis in the desert where everyone live a personal, beautiful experience, because you have everything you need in that specific space, in that specific place, in that specific environment, which is very limited. There's a strict perimeter where you can find everything you need. You can find water, you can find food, you can find fruit, you can find shelter, you can find even some shadow if you are lucky, right? A special place, all for you, but just for you and just for people who are living there. And that's the problem of the co-housing in general. Since the co-housing work as the co-housers work as the pioneers, as the colonizers who moved through the big continent, the new continent, from east to west to discover new places. They got this challenge despite dangerous situation, recalling groups of people when they had put their tents or their house, their shelter in the big empty spaces that could have been colonized by their energies, by their needs, by their religion, by their superiorness that they was in a certain way imposing to the already existing people. They produced beautiful spaces for them once again. Right? It were a kind of isolated, ideal city, a small town that was growing, where all of the relations were limited to a specific group of people, the members of this specific, beautiful new town. So I thought, well, that's once again, that's a problem. So if co-housing in general work like oases, isolated, detached each other, where every single member disposes of a lot of facilities, a lot of space that can be shared each other, and where they can find this beautiful balance between people. It works because it's a restricted group of people who are living this special and some way, I would say also isolating condition. So if we want that it could work, we have to think about where to put this relation, where to put the new element within the formula, because the element R, so the relationships, are so important that we cannot think about relationships related only to people who are living in a restricted space, but we have to think about a net of relationships which are within and without that specific environment. So I thought about those two texts about Roland Barthes, Comment vivre ensemble, and Max Weber, Order and Diversity, which was the title itself recalling the idea of community without propinquity. Right? We can learn so much from these two books in terms of how we must really to think about our houses, our cities in terms of quality of housing, in terms of what we are drawing. We are not drawing only a good building, but we are drawing and so designing, projecting, planning, thinking about all of those elements that I'm trying to find in the formula. So R, like relationships. But is this enough? I don't know, but it's very close to the possible solution, especially when we see that those spaces within that specific environment could be used in many different ways. A kind of elastic solution where we know that spaces have to be adaptable. Like sponges, they absorb all of the diversity of people who are using the same space. And so a simple sidewalk could be transformed into a playground for many different things. Could be invented as a public space where to play chess, or could be a place where to eat. Right? The imagination of people who are using the space is with no limits. We can even think about something that for us is not a place, it's not a space, it's not even an environment, but can be something and can be something to be shared, and can be something where we live. We live, it's not only, I mean, I intend live in the wider sense, right? Where people got into relationships each other. So I got a step back and I thought, maybe the net, the single co-housing can't work alone. It can't be a detached building, isolated by all of the things that are around the building itself. It is, despite the place where it is built, it must be part of the city. So co-housing in general should be put into a net of connections each other in order to open those places to other people, but should be put within the wider net of the city, where the relationship is a common way of sharing the space every day. In the city, we live together, we stay together, we share space, we meet people, we produce energy through this exchange of thoughts that is impossible in a restricted community. Sooner or later, the substance are consumed. So I thought maybe this could be not the final one, and of course there are many other things that could be said, but something that is very close to the solution. A formula that collects all of those stuff, and where relationships, as you see in the formula, is augmented, is incremented, is perfectioned by the PS, the public space. So we have to think that all of those relationships could be shared within the house, as the co-housing usually does. But we also think, we also must think about finding a way to expand, to think about this solution in a wider environment. That's why I thought that maybe we could talk about the built environment as the phenotype, extending the idea of quality from housing to the whole building and built environment, and to think about the living behavior as the genotype, so or as the elements that contain all of the elements, so that can be useful for the definition of the phenotype itself. And I try to understand if it works, because when we look at those spaces where places are used in different way, which is, let's say, part of the common tradition, especially in Italy and the Mediterranean places, where squares are the place where things happen, where people meet each other, where products are sold, or where people can sing, where people can dance or have a gym. I thought that, well, maybe the quality of living, now I think we should move the term from housing to living, is a very complex system where all of those elements have to be put together. A place for everyone, where we can share things and space, where we should think about the ground floor. And in this way, I think that we had the beautiful lessons in the past about the necessity of planning, designing the soil, like Secchi was used to say, to provide spaces where the built houses, the built environment is strictly mixed to a common life which is out of the house. And therefore, we can say that the quality of living, it's the way that we really can balance the two things, the outdoor and the indoor, the built and the open space, the private and the public, through the lens of culture, and without forgetting all of the elements that that I was collecting in that possible formula. Thank you.
Thank you for your very stimulating lecture, Jacopo. And we are discussing with the students about some models types that you presented again to us today. And I find very interesting this relationship with co-housing in a very extensive sense to the city, to the urban environment. But my question is about the traditional co-housing. That's to say, which I would have a site in the future from you, also for the housing itself, in which kind of transformation could we realize to have in the existing buildings, for instance, some more co-housing elements and perspectives?
Okay, so let's say that generally speaking, co-housing is a place where, as I said before, we share some spaces and we share some facilities. That's why we have to intend the co-housing as a, let's say, big box where we'll find the private spaces and collective, not public spaces. So it's a private space, but shared by many people who are members of the same co-housing. If we consider how the co-housing works, the co-housing is a very easy, let's say, a smart solution where the amount of square meters for each single dwelling is reduced around, let's say, 10%, more or less. The summation, as the formula that I showed before, of those 10% taken from each single dwelling produces an amount of square meters that will be used for shared activities, for shared space with shared facilities. This is the main structure of the co-housing. It's the way the co-housing is intended and designed. So if to reply to your question, Gianluca, if we have to think about the co-housing starting from an existing building, the first thing is to see if we can reduce the single dwelling in order to obtain this space. Because without shared space and without shared facilities, there's no co-housing. The co-housing is a specific place where people meet each other, stay together, and share energies, not only spaces, places, or facilities. So the problem is, I would say, when you approach to an existing building, the first problem is to look at the number of square meters. If you can reduce the single dwelling, the single apartment within the same building. If not, that's a problem because you have to find a place, or I would say a space, which could be another place without, out of the building, where to collect all of those facilities. In this way, the Northern American type, which derives from the Danish, from the Danish solution, is something that was originated by the same concept. They moved away, they moved out of the building, all of the collective facilities and spaces in what is called a common house. So if you have not space within the house, you can find a way, if you can, of course, you should find a way to collect all of those stuff in another building, which is, of course, much smaller, and that has to be very close to your building, to your previous building, possibly even very easily, let's say, in a central position, if considering all of the building or dwellings that are hosting the people who are living there, the members of the co-housing. So let's consider that now you have the possibility to build this. The second aspect that you have to take into account, that you have to manage, is the number of people who are living there. So if we consider co-housing in general, well, this is very difficult to be defined, because we have examples that are so different each other. In Italy, generally, co-housing are small, very small, few families. Sometimes they, especially the public administrations who are managing or involving or even creating co-housing, they generally call co-housing a place with, let's say, more or less 20 people, 15 people, which is too small to create a community. Through studies and through different examples, some positive, some negative, some failures, it was demonstrated that 45 people is a good number to consider a co-housing. That's a number that allowed to have to create the sense of the community, so to be able to share energies and spaces and play and facilities each other, to take care each other. But it's also not too big to make this vanishing, this sense of community. If it's too little, they have no energies, physical energy to take care of all. If they are too many, they are too, the number is too big to create community. So it's a balance once again. So I would say a question of room space, I mean, a question of number of people, and a sense of community that has to be spontaneous. You cannot impose anyone to live in a co-housing, because co-housing, it's not only having facilities, it's taking care of those facilities and taking care of people who are living with you, of the other members of the community. So that's a very important aspect. It's an important issue in the formula for a co-housing, because otherwise you have something that could be thought as a collaborative housing, which is something different. People can collaborate, can even do things together, but they are not, in brackets, obliged, right, to do things. In a co-housing, you have to sign a contract where you assume the specific position in terms of availability, in terms of the way you approach the daily life, your behavior has to be ruled by a series of acceptance of the differences of the other people, or sharing values. The chart of values is the contract they sign is called a chart of values, which is very important, but it's a big heavy to manage, right? So I think that if you can manage these three things, you can start talking about co-housing. But there's no formula, no solution. It's always a question of finding the way that people can stay together to create a community. And that is very interesting, but at the same time, it's very difficult because usually the most they can stay together, they create a community. The more they can stay together, the more they isolate each other from the society. So that's why I was talking about the need to mix those two things, to find a balance of co-housing within the city, not without, being part of the city, being part of a wider system, which is creating a net of relationship. And this is very interesting, not only from, let's say, a sociological perspective. It's also a question of architecture. How can we create this net? What do we provide to co-housers and to the citizens to be together, to stay together, to be part of a wider system? I think that's the main challenge nowadays.
So thank you. And could we consider co-working also as a form of co-housing, by your opinion?
No, absolutely not. It's just co. They share the prefix co, but it's not the same thing. Co-working is a place where we share, once again, spaces and facilities, but there's no investment in terms of personal experience in that specific place. I pay for it. I simply pay. I rent my desk and I rent those facilities, which are not mine, but those are shared by me and other people who are using the same space. So it's co, once again, the prefix is co because we share facilities, but we cannot, there's no relation with co-housing. We don't live there. We simply work there. What is interesting in co-working is they use the same aspect, the same solution to create a kind of a synergy, and once again, a net between people. Because when you work in a co-working, even if you rent your desk, and even if you rent your meeting room or a special place just for you, sooner or later you will meet someone. If you work alone in your office, you can be like I am, alone, right? There's no one around me. I have no relationship with anyone while I'm working. But if you work in a co-working, sooner or later you will bump into someone, right? And when you meet someone, you start talking, even if you are there and you live alone in a grotto, right? It's a question of providing opportunities. It's not a question of forcing them to be part of a group or to be member of a community. It's an opportunity. It's the way that you as an architect create a space where people can meet, and by meeting they can do something together. The things could happen because they meet, not because they are alone. So in this way, co-working works as the co-housing, but it's the only way we can some way assume any kind of comparable characteristic.
Thanks.
It's hi, everyone. It's an interesting lecture. Starting from another point of view, it's not starting from a social question, what is sharing, what is coexistence in the space, and I think it's an interesting point of view for an architect, starting not from space, but from the relationship. And I think it's a good lesson for our students and for our classroom, this idea to build a relationship, social relationship before space. This is a condition, not easy, I think, for this moment, because we are in a pandemic situation. Sometimes it's not easy to restart that kind of condition. But I think the work in the classroom can be an opportunity to define this idea, to realize space for social moment, for realize connection for people. And I think it's an interesting point of view. Thank you, Jacopo.
Thank you. You're welcome.